The email landed in Donald Trump's inbox early Monday morning. A special invitation to appear on The Melissa Carter Show, one of the most watched talk shows in the country. The host, Melissa Carter, was known for her sharp-tongued interviews, always pushing boundaries, always crafting narratives. This wasn't just any invitation, it was a setup. But Trump had faced tougher opponents than a talk show host. Trump sat in his office at Trump Tower, scrolling through the message on his phone. He knew Carter's reputation well. Her show was built on viral moments, dramatic tension, and carefully edited footage that turned high-profile guests into headlines. If she invited him, it wasn't for a fair conversation, it was to make a spectacle. The question was, did he care? He leaned back in his chair, smirked slightly, and tapped out a response. "I'll be there. Let's have some fun." Back at the Melissa Carter Show studio, the producers were already at work. The segment had been planned for weeks. The audience was handpicked, some genuine supporters, but mostly critics, carefully seated to create the illusion of a divided room. The questions were designed to corner him, push him into a moment of anger or frustration that could be clipped, shared, and dissected by every major media outlet within minutes. Melissa Carter wanted a viral moment, and she was going to get one. She sat at the conference table, flipping through her cue cards. Her team gathered around her. "He's an easy target," one producer said. "The guy talks in headlines. We push him the right way, and he'll say something we can run with." Melissa smirked. "We'll frame him as outdated, as someone stuck in the past, unable to keep up with the new America. That's the angle. If he fights back, we spin it. If he laughs it off, we push harder. Either way, we control the story." They all nodded in agreement. They thought they had everything planned. But they didn't realize Donald Trump had been playing this game long before they had even learned the rules. On the day of the interview, Trump stepped out of his black SUV, his signature suit crisp, his red tie perfectly in place. The studio staff whispered among themselves as he walked through the hallway. Some watched with curiosity, others with skepticism, but Trump paid them no mind. He was here to put on a show, but it wasn't going to be Melissa Carter's show. It was going to be his. Inside the studio, Melissa was already seated, the cameras rolling, the audience buzzing with anticipation. The red light blinked, signaling the live broadcast. "Donald Trump," Melissa said with a wide, practiced smile. "Welcome to the show." Trump nodded, settling into his chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other adjusting his cufflinks. "Great to be here, Melissa. Fantastic show you've got." The audience chuckled softly. He was playing it cool, but Melissa was ready. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Donald, let's start with the obvious question," she said smoothly. "You've been one of the most influential figures in American politics and business. But let's be honest, some people think your time is up, that you're part of a generation that just doesn't fit in today's world. What do you say to those who believe America has moved on from you?" A calculated jab. A trap disguised as a simple question. Melissa expected Trump to defend himself, to push back, maybe even get flustered. But he just smiled. "Well, Melissa," he said, his voice steady, measured. "People have been saying that for years. They said it in 2016. They said it in 2020. And guess what? They'll say it in 2028 too. Because that's what people do when they're afraid of change, real change." The audience shifted, some nodding, others frowning. Melissa wasn't thrown off just yet, but she could sense that he wasn't going to be as easy to rattle as she had hoped. She flipped to her next card. "Time to escalate. Let's talk about power," she continued, her smile tightening just slightly. "You built an empire, ran the most powerful country in the world, but critics say your leadership style is aggressive, outdated, some might even say dangerous. What do you say to those who believe leadership today should be about unity, compromise, and, well, being softer?" Another trap. She wanted him to either double down, confirming her narrative, or backtrack, looking weak. Trump, however, had no interest in playing by her rules. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Melissa, I built businesses. I created jobs. I negotiated some of the toughest deals in history. Do you think the world we live in today is softer?" He paused, letting the question settle. "Or do you think it's more cutthroat than ever? Because I'll tell you something, leaders who sit around talking about unity but don't know how to lead, they get eaten alive." The audience murmured again. Melissa's smile didn't falter, but the control she had at the start of the interview was slipping. She could feel it. Trump sat back, adjusting his tie. "The truth is, people don't want weakness. They don't respect leaders who bend to every breeze. They want strength. They want confidence. And guess what? They want someone who actually knows how to get things done." Melissa quickly flipped through her cards. This wasn't working. He was too comfortable, too unrattled. She needed to push further. But Donald, she pressed, don't you think that kind of leadership style belongs in the past? The world is changing. Aren't you just refusing to change with it? Trump chuckled. A small, knowing laugh that sent a ripple through the room. Melissa, I don't think strength goes out of style. I think people just like to pretend it does when it's convenient. He gestured toward the audience. You can ask anyone in this room, when things go wrong, when the economy crashes, when the world is in chaos, do you want someone who's soft and unsure? Or do you want someone who gets in there and fixes it? The audience reacted. A mix of applause and murmurs. Melissa knew she was losing ground. She needed her viral moment. She glanced at her producer, who gave her a subtle nod. It was time for the final play. Donald, she said, her voice dropping slightly, do you ever wonder if your time in the spotlight is over? Silence. The question lingered in the air, heavy with implication. The audience tensed. The producers leaned forward. Trump didn't move for a moment. Then he grinned. Melissa, he said smoothly, if my time was over, would we even be having this conversation? The audience erupted. Some in laughter, some in applause. Even those who had come expecting to dislike him couldn't help but acknowledge the brilliance of the moment. Trump had walked into an ambush and turned it into a stage. Melissa Carter's confident smile wavered for the first time. Her producers scrambled, knowing that whatever headline they had hoped for Trump crushed, Trump exposed was gone. Because this wasn't their viral moment anymore. It was his. The studio lights beamed down, hot and relentless. Melissa Carter sat motionless, her usual polished composure showing the faintest cracks. Across from her, Donald Trump adjusted his jacket, resting one hand on the table as if it were any other business meeting. There was no anger in his face, no frustration, just a man completely in control, and everyone watching could feel it. The control room was in chaos. Producers barked orders at each other through headsets, frantic voices arguing over how to steer the show back on course. They had carefully crafted this segment to corner him, to make him stumble, but none of it was working. Trump was dismantling them, without raising his voice, without breaking a sweat. Melissa forced a laugh. It didn't land. There was no warmth, no energy. The audience wasn't on her side anymore. The few people who had been placed in the crowd to challenge him were silent now. Some of them stared down at their phones, filming, their expressions unreadable. Others watched him directly, waiting to see what he would do next. Trump leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. Every inch of his posture exuded confidence. Melissa tried to interrupt, but he was already speaking. You brought me here to make a point, he said, his tone even. You wanted to show people that I'm part of the past, that America should move on from people like me. He paused. No one made a sound. But here's the truth. Leaders don't go out of style. Principles don't have an expiration date. You can dress up weakness in polite language. You can call it compromise, or progress, or inclusion. But when the world gets tough, and it always does, people don't look for that. They look for strength. They look for someone who knows how to fight. Melissa tried to regain control, raising a hand to stop him, but he didn't flinch. I've made mistakes, he said, his tone lowering. I've said things people didn't like. I've made decisions people disagreed with. But I built things. I created jobs. I stood up for Americans when it wasn't easy. And I never pretended to be something I'm not. Another pause. The camera feed lingered on his face. The entire studio seemed to shrink in that moment. You, Trump continued, his gaze fixed on Melissa, pretend to have conversations. But all you're really interested in is control. Melissa said nothing. Her expression was frozen. The room felt suffocating. In the control room, a producer finally snapped. Cut to commercial. Now. But it was too late. The audience was already reacting. Some clapped slowly at first. Others followed. Within seconds, the studio was filled with applause. Not overwhelming, but steady. Enough to drown out whatever Melissa might have said next. The cameras stayed live. Melissa straightened up, lifting her chin, but the damage was done. She tried to shift the focus back. Mr. Trump, she said, keeping her voice composed, this show is about ideas, and I believe in giving everyone a fair chance to speak. Trump gave a slow nod. You had that chance, and you used it to try to humiliate me. The applause grew louder. She forced another smile. We're all entitled to our opinions. Trump shook his head, just once. You're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to rewrite the truth. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way he said them, deliberate, calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The show cut to commercial seconds later, But it didn't matter. Every person in that studio knew what they had just seen, and it wasn't over. The producers gathered around Melissa during the break. She waved them off, staring at her cards, flipping through them as if searching for something she had lost. It wasn't a question anymore. She had lost control of the room, and of the narrative. When they returned from commercial, the air was different. Heaviness hung over the audience. Some of them looked at Trump differently now. Some with respect. Others with a mixture of unease and reluctant admiration. Melissa cleared her throat, tried to smile again, but it looked strained. "Mr. Trump," she began, "there are many people who see you as divisive, who believe your time in the public spotlight should end. What would you say to them?" The producers had instructed her to keep it simple. Stick to the script. Try to recover something from this disaster. Trump didn't hesitate. "I say this isn't about me. It's about America. And if people are uncomfortable with someone who speaks plainly, who stands up for the people who built this country, then maybe they're not ready for what's coming next." He left it there. No elaboration. Just a statement that hung heavy in the air. Melissa ended the interview soon after. She had no choice. Trump stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, nodded once toward the audience, then turned and walked off the set without looking back. The reaction was immediate. Audience members stood. Some clapped, some filmed, others simply watched him leave. Melissa Carter sat in her chair, unmoving. The red light on the camera blinked out. The crew was silent. By the time Trump's team left the building, the clips were already online. Unedited, raw footage captured by audience phones showed the entire exchange. People were sharing it everywhere. Social media lit up. The hashtags were brutal. Trump didn't flinch, Melissa exposed, respect is earned, control lost. The news networks scrambled. Some tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding. Others called it a media failure. But no one could deny what had happened. Trump hadn't just survived the ambush, he had flipped it, controlled it, and walked away stronger. Melissa Carter's producers met late that night. Sponsors were calling. Her network wanted answers. Some were already questioning if she should stay on the air. And Trump? He spent the evening back at Trump Tower, having dinner with his team, as if it were just another day. The story wasn't over. But Melissa Carter's version of it was finished. The morning after the broadcast, Melissa Carter's team gathered in the glass-walled conference room on the 23rd floor. The atmosphere was silent and grim. Phones vibrated across the table, notifications stacking faster than anyone could clear them. Half the staff avoided her eyes. The other half were too busy scanning social media, watching the damage accelerate in real time. On the screen mounted to the wall, Melissa watched the uncut footage of her show again. This time, without edits, without filters. Just the raw sequence of events. She had thought the control was hers. The timing, the questions, the pressure. But on playback, it was undeniable. She had never controlled the room at all. Donald Trump had walked in prepared, unshaken, and left her exposed. By noon, 3 of the show's biggest sponsors had pulled their ads. Their official statements avoided directly blaming Melissa, but their intentions were clear. They wanted distance. The network's legal team had already sent a request for an emergency meeting. No one used the words termination, not yet. But the signs were there. Meanwhile, clips of the confrontation dominated every platform. On television, pundits debated whether Melissa's tactics were ethical, whether she had crossed the line. Online, the narrative was simpler. She had tried to humiliate a man who refused to be humiliated. And he had humiliated her instead, without anger, without losing his temper, without even raising his voice. The hashtag spread faster than her team could track. Hashtag Trump didn't flinch. Hashtag respect is earned. Hashtag Melissa ambush fails. Hashtag strength without apology. Each clip, each screenshot showed the same thing. Donald Trump, seated calmly, meeting every trap with a directness that disarmed it completely. The soundbite that circulated the most wasn't even one she had prepared for. "You're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to rewrite the truth." It was simple, unedited, and lethal. Melissa slammed her fist on the table, making several staff members flinch. She pushed back from her chair, pacing the room, her mind racing for solutions. Spin wouldn't work. Damage control wouldn't work. Not when Trump hadn't done a single interview about it, hadn't released a statement, hadn't posted on social media. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any defense. By the time Melissa returned to her office, her agent was waiting. His expression said everything. He closed the door behind him. "The network's preparing a statement. They're offering you an out. Step away from the show, say it's your decision, save face." Melissa didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window at the city below. She had built her career on control, on precision, on keeping the upper hand. In 30 minutes on live television, Donald Trump had dismantled all of it. Her agent spoke again. "They're not going to fight for you. You're not worth the PR nightmare." Melissa nodded slowly. The humiliation burned deeper than anything Trump had said. It wasn't personal. It was worse. It was professional. Her entire career, undone not by anger or scandal, but by a single interview she thought she had rigged. At that exact moment, several blocks away, Donald Trump was stepping out of his black SUV in front of Trump Tower. He greeted his security with a nod, gave a brief wave to the press clustered near the entrance, and walked inside without a word. He didn't need to say anything. The story was writing itself. Inside the elevator, Trump stood still, watching the city blur past the glass. His team had already briefed him. His approval ratings had spiked overnight. Social media sentiment was overwhelmingly in his favor. Media outlets that had criticized him were scrambling to rewrite their narratives, unsure how to balance their coverage now that their preferred talk show host had self-destructed. But Trump wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about the next move. By the time he reached his office, his staff was ready. They laid out the offers, interviews, exclusive features, speaking engagements. Every network wanted him now. Every publication wanted the first quote. But he turned them down. Every single one. No interviews. No appearances. No explanations. Silence was his message. His communications director smiled. "It's driving them crazy. They don't know how to spin it because you're not giving them anything new." Trump nodded. "Let them guess." The strategy worked. Every hour he said nothing, the momentum grew. Articles speculated on his intentions. Was he running again? Was he building something new? Was this the beginning of another campaign? He ignored it all. He knew they would fill the void with whatever they feared most. Meanwhile, Melissa Carter's silence was viewed as retreat. Weakness. A sign of guilt. No one gave her the benefit of the doubt. They didn't need to. The video was clear. She had tried to control a conversation with a man who refused to be controlled. And now, she was left explaining herself to a world that had already made up its mind. By week's end, her show was officially canceled. The announcement was quiet, almost polite. She released a statement thanking her team and her viewers, claiming she was stepping down to pursue new opportunities. No one believed it. And no one cared. Donald Trump didn't comment. He didn't acknowledge the announcement. He didn't have to. But those closest to him knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in winning. And this wasn't about one talk show host. It was about setting a tone, establishing the rules of engagement. The next time someone tried to corner him, they'd think twice. And for Donald Trump, that was enough. The headlines kept coming, day after day. Melissa Carter's fall from grace. The interview that ended a career. Trump outmaneuvers Hollywood's toughest host. They filled the screens in newsrooms, flooded timelines on every platform, and circled in conversation among politicians, media strategists, and executives who had once dismissed Donald Trump as a man of the past. Now, they weren't so sure. At Trump Tower, the mood was controlled and deliberate. His staff understood the strategy, but even they hadn't expected the response to be this overwhelming. Their offices were buried in requests. More networks, more offers, more debates proposed by people who had criticized him the day before. Most of these were ignored. Trump was giving them nothing, and that decision only made him more relevant. Inside his private office, Trump reviewed the latest polling data. His team had laid it out in simple terms. His approval ratings had surged. Public sentiment, even among those who had opposed him, was shifting. Something about what had happened on that stage resonated. Not because of policy, not because of politics, but because of perception. People had seen him outthink a media machine that had spent years trying to destroy him. And he hadn't just survived it. He had dismantled it without raising his voice. There was no gloating, no self-congratulation. That wasn't the plan. Trump knew the game better than anyone. Victory wasn't about celebrating in the moment. It was about building leverage for what came next. In private meetings, he laid out the framework for a new initiative. His advisors took notes, keeping up as he outlined the architecture of a campaign that wasn't about revenge. It was about dominance. Rebuilding alliances where it made sense. Cutting ties where it didn't. Every move calculated to maximize advantage. Every decision informed by what the public had just witnessed. Melissa Carter was already fading from the conversation. Her downfall was complete, and the media cycle was moving on. But not before she issued a final statement, an attempt to salvage what was left of her reputation. She released a pre-recorded video, 3 minutes long, heavily edited. In it, she claimed she was misunderstood, that she had only been doing her job. She deflected blame onto her producers, her network, the toxic culture of media expectations. But no one cared. The comments under the video were brutal. Few people even bothered to finish watching it. Trump didn't need to comment. He didn't instruct his team to amplify the failure. It wasn't necessary. The audience had already made their judgment. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, several media executives held meetings to reassess their strategy. Some of them had openly mocked Trump's appearance on Melissa's show. Now they were cautious. They had watched how easily he had dismantled a controlled narrative and understood the risk of underestimating him again. Their notes were clear: do not try to trap him. It won't work. In Washington, political strategists studied the footage of the interview. Analysts, campaign managers, and donors all took notice. He had demonstrated something they rarely saw: control under fire. It wasn't about policy detail or rhetoric. It was about presence. In an age of noise, Trump's silence had been louder than any attack ad. And Trump himself? He kept working. Early mornings, late nights, meetings with staff, calls with donors, negotiations with media partners. Every step measured, every message tightly controlled. He knew better than anyone that perception was power. And right now, perception was on his side. When a journalist asked for a comment at an event in Florida, Trump paused for a moment. Cameras flashed. The room waited. Then he shook his head once. "We're just getting started." It was the only thing he said. And it was the only thing he needed to. By the end of the week, his approval ratings climbed again. His team finalized plans for a new series of rallies. Not as a response to the interview, but as a demonstration of what came next. His opponents scrambled to adjust. Some called for renewed scrutiny. Others backed away entirely. And those who remained silent understood the risk of speaking without leverage. Melissa Carter became a cautionary tale. Her name was mentioned in briefings as an example of overreach. Her career, once a model for aggressive journalism, was now synonymous with strategic failure. And Trump? He kept moving forward. No reaction. No retaliation. Just progress. The people who had tried to end him were watching. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The following month was quiet on the surface. No press conferences. No sudden announcements. Donald Trump maintained his usual routine: early mornings, tightly scheduled meetings, and occasional public appearances that offered little more than a wave or a short statement. But inside the offices of Trump Tower, the real work was underway. He met with his most trusted advisors in small groups. There were no leaks, no photo ops. The tone of these meetings was disciplined. He spoke directly, laying out the strategy that would carry him through the next phase. It wasn't about responding to attacks. It wasn't about rehashing old victories. It was about setting a tone of inevitability. Melissa Carter's collapse had sent a message across media and politics. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. There was a new standard for confrontation. If you weren't prepared to lose, you didn't enter the room. She had entered the room. She hadn't been ready. The clip from the interview still circulated online. Not because Trump's team was pushing it, but because the public wouldn't let it go. Millions of views turned into tens of millions. Analysts dissected every second of his response: his tone, his timing, his silence. They called it a masterclass in restraint. They called it calculated. They missed the point. It wasn't calculated. It was natural. That's what made it effective. Executives from major networks sent invitations for interviews. None were accepted. Offers to host debates were declined. Pundits speculated about whether Trump was retreating. But inside his team, they knew the truth. He wasn't retreating. He was waiting. Letting the noise grow loud enough that when he spoke next, there would be no competition for attention. Meanwhile, Melissa Carter was still fighting for relevance. A second apology video was posted. Shorter. More desperate. It was ignored. Sponsors didn't return her calls. Her ratings dropped below the threshold required to stay on air. Within weeks, her show was quietly canceled. Her name became shorthand for failure. People stopped quoting her. Her legacy was reduced to a single sentence from a man who hadn't raised his voice. And Donald Trump? He focused on the next move. A campaign built on discipline, not outrage. Events were organized, speeches delivered. But they weren't reactive. They were controlled. Messages were simple: strength, order, clarity. Supporters responded. Crowds grew larger. Donations increased. Allies who had distanced themselves returned. In private conversations, Governors, senators, and foreign leaders expressed renewed respect. Some admitted they hadn't expected him to withstand the ambush. Others said nothing, but the change in their posture was clear. They no longer looked for weakness. They looked for direction. By early summer, the polls reflected what was happening behind the scenes. Support had solidified. Opposition fragmented. Analysts said he was unstoppable. Opponents insisted they still had time. They didn't. One morning, as Trump stood by his office window overlooking Manhattan, his communications director entered with a report. Another network had canceled a segment critical of him. They claimed it was a programming decision. It wasn't. They didn't want to risk being the next Melissa Carter. He nodded once, acknowledging the report. He didn't need to say anything. Later that day, he held a private meeting with campaign staff. The message was clear. No victory laps, he said. We stay focused. And they did. His rallies became events marked by a sense of order and purpose. No outbursts. No missteps. Every word measured. Every move intentional. Supporters noticed. So did his critics. By autumn, the campaign was ahead in every battleground state. Media coverage turned cautious. Outlets that had once declared him finished now described him as inevitable. When Trump finally sat for another interview, it was with a respected international journalist. The setting was formal. The tone serious. The questions were difficult, but fair. His answers were sharp and controlled. No controversy. No spectacle. Just a demonstration of command. After the interview, as cameras were packed away, the journalist said quietly, "They underestimated you." Trump didn't reply. He didn't need to. The message had already been sent. He was still here. Stronger. Smarter. Unbreakable. And he had done it without shouting. The final image wasn't of victory. It wasn't of conquest. It was of discipline. Melissa Carter's collapse wasn't his victory. It was his warning. For anyone who thought they could trap him again,